قد أفلح المؤمنون.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected Muslim brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we are going to be we're going to begin covering the story of the martyrdom of Syeda Fatima al-Zahara. It has been narrated that Fatima alayhi salam is a Siddiqa Shahida. She is a truthful and she is a martyr. And so essentially what we will be doing is we will be explaining this hadith, as in this short line from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The story behind Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra's martyrdom is what we are going to be covering. And if you have not already watched our videos regarding the merits of Fatima al-Zahra and the marriage of Fatima al-Zahra, I would highly recommend you do so. As usual, this is going to be the short introduction before we dive in. When it comes to the martyrdom of one of the Ahlul Bayt, comes to the martyrdom of any of these figures who we hold in high regard, it is imperative that we build a relationship with them. Many people often ask, they say, I go to majalis, I listen to the siyar of these people, and I cannot bring myself to cry. We say it can be for a number of reasons, and one of the most unfortunate ones is that this is not someone that you have a personal relationship with. If you don't know who this person is, if you don't know what they look like, if you don't know who they are, what they did, why they matter, it is very difficult to listen to their biography or to listen to the oppression that they endured and essentially to sympathize with them, to empathize with them, and to cry over their sorrow. And we know from various ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt that crying for the Prophet's Ahlul Bayt is an act of great merit. It is an act in which we are following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So with that being said, today we are going to be going over the events following the Prophet's death. And as we delve into these heart-wrenching events that lead to the martyrdom of Fatima al-Zahra, we will go over, in the wake of her father's tragic demise, the merciless attack on her beloved home. And indeed, if it weren't for what happened at Karbala a few years later, and the martyrdom of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we would say that this act of oppression would stand as the darkest stain in the annals of Islamic history. As in, were it not for the martyrdom of Rasulullah, were it not for the martyrdom of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, were it not for the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen and al-Hasan alayhim salam, which we've already covered, perhaps this would be the greatest tragedy of all. And yet, the sorrow doesn't end there. Because the thing that's really important about a Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha, that I think a lot of people tend to overlook, is that at the end of the day, Fatima is a woman. When we talk about a personality, obviously being a woman is a huge part of who Fatima al-Zahra is. She's Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen. She's one of the 4 women of paradise. So as we go over these events, I want you to keep that in mind. I want you to keep in mind that at the end of the day, even though she is ma'soom, even though she is the daughter of a prophet, that this is a woman, that these things that happen to a woman, that a woman was forced to endure these hardships in a few short months after the death of her father. She was denied her inheritance. She was betrayed by essentially the people who, all of them, thousands of them, claimed to love her father during his lifetime. The man who had selflessly given everything that he had away for the betterment of the Muslim community. I want you to keep that in mind as we go over these events. I want you to soften your heart as you listen to the story, as you listen to what happened. Of course, we're going to analyze this, we're going to dissect it, we're going to come at it from a very historical, from a very academic approach, but at the end of the day, it is difficult not to become emotional over the Prophet's daughter, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So with that being said, we know that the combined stress and suffering of these events is what led to Sayyidah Zahra's miscarriage and her eventual martyrdom. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And we carry this heavy burden of grief, and we seek solace in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is narrated by Anas ibn Malik that when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was suffering the agonies of death, or he was going through the final phases of his life, Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha, she said, "Oh my father, what a severe agony." And Rasulullah ﷺ said, "Your father will suffer no more agony after this day. There has come to your father that which no one can avoid, the death that everyone will encounter until the day of resurrection." It has also been narrated by Aisha that in his final illness, the Prophet ﷺ called his daughter Fatima and told her a secret, and because of this secret that she began to weep. Then he called her again and told her another secret, and she started to laugh, or she started to smile. Aisha says, when I asked her about that, she replied, "The Prophet told me that he would die in his fatal illness, and so I wept. But then he told me that amongst his family I would be the first to join him, and so I laughed." It is also reported that when the Prophet ﷺ, when he passed away, when he was martyred, Syeda Zahra alayhi salam said to Anas ibn Malik, who was the servant in the Prophet's house, she said to him, "O Anas, do you feel pleased to throw earth over Allah's messenger?" Which is essentially she's saying, how can you bring yourself to do this, to throw dirt over Allah's messenger, how can you bear the burden of burying Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Anas also narrates that when the Prophet passed away, Fatima alayhi salam said, "O my father, to Jibreel we announce his death. O my father, how much closer is he now to his Lord? O my father, the paradise of Firdaus is his abode. O my father, he has answered the call of his Lord." And this is narrated in Sunan ibn Majah, hadith 1630. And this is called, in Arabic, this is called ritha, the praising of someone, when you praise someone after his death, or when you mourn someone through elegy, through poetry after his death. And this shows that Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha, this is something that is very interesting. When it comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullahi alayhi, he is well known for his eloquence. He is known for being Nahj al-Balagha. Correct. He is known for his diwan, for his poetry. When it comes to, for example, al-Hasan wal-Hussein and his wife Fatima, many people don't think of them in that way. They don't think of them as being very eloquent people or very well-spoken people. But this is really interesting because it shows that even when mourning the loss of her father, the Sayyidah Zahra did not lose any of her eloquence. And as we already covered, or we will cover in the Khutbah Fadakiyah, you see that even when she's going through pain, when she's suffering, when she's feeling anguish, she still does not lose that sharp tongue, that sharp wit that she has. We will begin discussing the attack on the Sayyidah Zahra's home. So in the aftermath of the events of Saqifa, which we're not going to go over here, because that's a discussion for another day. In the aftermath of Saqifa, Bani Hashim and their allies began to gather at Fatima's home, seeking to determine the next course of action in response to what Quraysh and their allies had done. So word of this opposition meeting in Fatima's house reached Abu Bakr and his allies, instilling fear that this group could unite others against them and pose a significant challenge to Abu Bakr's authority. Before we move on to some of these reports, I want to go over this really quickly. Whenever people ask in Islamic history, where is the basis of the Shia? What is the origin of the Shia? So you have the likes of Ibn Hazm claiming that the Shia is a Persian conspiracy. It's a Persian conspiracy in order to take back the empire. And that's completely ridiculous. It's completely absurd. It's something that we've refuted many, many times. Easy example is if it's a Persian conspiracy, how come so many people in Iran love Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas? Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas is a full an Arab on both sides. More people probably know about Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas in Iran than they know about Imam Zayn al-Abidin, who is a half Persian from his mother's side. So others tried to claim that the Shia, their origin lies in, the Jews. It's a Jewish conspiracy. And this is quite ironic. The people who have tafsir from Ka'b al-Ahbar are accusing the Shia of having their origin in Judaism. So when someone asks the question, says, well, where do we look to really to see the origin of the Shia? We would say this is one of the easiest examples, is that we have narrations from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam praising Ali and his Shia during his own lifetime, but then when you finally see them, you put a face to the name, is here in Fatima's house. You see the people that are meeting in Fatima's house. Many of them, we call them, these are the Salaf of the Shia. These are the earliest of the Shia. And obviously some of them, went bad later, like the infamous case of Zubayr ibn al-Awwam. But others, for example, you see Salman, Miqdad, Abu Dhar, and of course you see Fatima, that this was her home, that she was one of the leaders of this movement. Aslam, the servant of Umar ibn al-Khattab, narrates the following. He says, when the Bay'ah went to Abu Bakr after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ali and Zubayr were entering into the house of Fatima to consult her and to revise their issue. So when Umar came to know about this, he went to Fatima and said, O daughter of the Messenger of Allah, no one is dearest to us more than your father, and no one dearest to us after your father than you. However, I swear by Allah that if these people gather in your house, then nothing will prevent me from giving the order to burn the house and those who are inside. So Aslam continues, so when Umar left, they, meaning Ali and Zubayr, came to Fatima and she said to them, do you know that Umar came here and he swore by Allah to burn the house if you gather here? I swear by God that Umar will execute his oath, so please leave wisely and take a decision and don't gather here again. So they left her and did not gather until they gave bay'ah to Abu Bakr. So this report is quite infamous. This is of course, the report of Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba. And this is a report many of you have heard of, many of you have seen brought up in polemics. It's very well known, it's very famous, and it's only becoming more famous as time goes on. There was once a time when the Mukhalifin, what they would say is that the Shia, they only have this in their books, I'm sorry. You'll never be able to pull this up in our books. And then, subhanAllah, as these books became more and more available, more people started reading, we have the internet, people started realizing, oh, this actually has a basis. So, this hadith is in Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, volume 21, page 143 to 144, tradition 39,827. So we need to discuss this report. I don't like to turn the majalis of ta'ziyah, of sorrow and mourning into a polemical discussion, but I do believe that, in the service of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, it is acceptable. So this hadith's chain of transmission is sahih, as all of the narrators are narrators of Bukhari and Muslim. If we wanted to, we can go over all the narrators one by one, but that would truly be a waste of time, as other brothers have gone over this. And perhaps, inshallah, we'll make a separate video detailing this. But here's the interesting thing. This hadith is not just in Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba. It is found in other books. It is found in other very old books, like primary sources of hadith. Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba would say is probably the oldest one, but is also found in Fada'il al-Sahaba by Ahmad ibn Hanbal in volume 1, page 364, hadith 532. It is also found in one of Ibn Abi Asim's book, al-Mudhakkar wa-Tadhkir wa-Dhikr, in page 41. I believe this is hadith report number 19. And Ibn Abdul Bar's Kitab al-Isti'ab, which is one of the classic biographical dictionaries of the Sahaba, on page 378. What's special about these three reports? Why am I grouping them together? All of these reports have the threat. The two reports here, Fada'il al-Sahaba and al-Isti'ab by Ibn Abdul Bar, have censored the report. They replaced Umar's threat with kada wa kada. Al-Mudhakkar wa-Tadhkir wa-Dhikr by Ibn Abi Asim did not censor the report. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi in Tarikh Baghdad, volume 6, page 75, in biography number 2569, also has this report, but he removed the threat entirely. So his version of the report, it has Umar telling Fatima, no one is more beloved to us than your father, and no one after your father is more beloved to us than you, and then that's where he stops. So the hadith ends up looking like a very nice hadith. Looks like Umar is telling Fatima how much he loves her and he loves her father and you're very important to us. The threat is just completely removed. The context of this event is completely removed. It is also mentioned in al-Mustadrak al-Sahihain by al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, and he also does not have the threat at the end. It's in al-Mustadrak volume 3, page 168 to 169, hadith number 4736. And al-Khawarizmi, Sahib al-Maqtal, in his book Maqtal al-Hussein, he also has this report as well, and it's almost identical to the one of al-Hakim. Quite fascinating, because this is a Sahih report, and this shows you how the Mukhalifin are very devious, they're very dishonest when it comes to their tactics. As in, when they tell you, it's like, show me something in my books, we show it to them in their books. And they say, oh, I want it to be Sahih. You show them that it's Sahih, it's a Sahih chain. Then what they do is when you give a Sahih chain, they start playing games. And many of you have seen this for yourselves. So when it comes to this hadith, what in recent years, what some people have tried to do is they claim that the report is disconnected due to Aslam having not been present. So there are a few replies to this. Number one, we say that Aslam narrating from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari. So even if Aslam is not physically present at this event, his mursal disconnected report is considered sahih by al-Bukhari. The same thing can be found in Jami' al-Tirmidhi. So it's Sahih al-Bukhari, it would be hadith number 4833, where he's narrating a story about Umar traveling with the Prophet, and in at-Tirmidhi he narrates a hadith straight from the Prophet regarding witr. So the other thing that we would respond is that we see in al-Mustadrak ala Sahihain, it says an Zayd ibn Aslam an abihi an Umar. So in certain versions of the report, he explicitly says he heard it from Umar. In other versions, he does not. Now, why is this important? This is important because you see in Hadi al-Sari, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani on page 292, and this is his muqaddimah, his intro to Fath al-Bari, Ibn Hajar explains that sometimes a tabi'i will narrate a story about a sahabi, or he will narrate a hadith about a sahabi. He will not explicitly say he heard it from the sahabi, but by virtue of simply mentioning that sahabi in the hadith, then you know that's where he got it from. And this is clear because, as I said in al-Mustadrak, it is clear that he is narrating this from Umar. This is not something that we would find unusual, because Umar, as we know in the famous hadith, his khutbah that he gives, that Ibn Abbas narrates, he admits that the bay'ah of Abu Bakr was a falta. He's not a man that is very good at concealing his own faults. And he's famous for such quotes where he says that everyone knows fiqh better than Umar, including the women. And I believe also it can be found in Kitab al-Tarikh al-Kabir by al-Bukhari in volume 5, page 445, where he says that Abu Bakr is better than me and I am more misguided than the ba'ir of my family. I'm more misguided than the camel of one of the camels of my household. So this is not something that we find surprising, that we see the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt admitting their own faults. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a remarkable way of exposing the truth, even if his no matter how hard his enemies try to hide it. This is just one report. When it comes to historical incidents, we try not to rely on one report. What we want is corroboration. We want numerous pieces of evidence. So this piece of evidence that we've provided here shows you that there was indeed a threat, and that there was indeed an opposition, and that it was indeed in Fatima's house. But there are other reports that back this up. There are other pieces of evidence that back this up. The first piece of evidence comes from al-Baladhuri, who's, as we know, is one of the primary sources of Islamic history, and who our scholars such as Sharif al-Murtada have authenticated as a historian. They say as a historian, he's very, very good. In Ansab al-Ashraf, volume 2, page 268, we read the following: that Abu Bakr requested that Ali give allegiance, and Ali did not answer the pledge. He did not answer the call. So Umar came with fire, or he came with a torch, and Fatima received them at the door. Alayhi salam, she received them at the door. And Fatima said to him, "O Ibn al-Khattab, do you want to burn my door?" And he said, "Yes, and this is stronger in terms of following what your father came with, or the religion of your father." So this report indicates, this is like, subhanAllah, how clear this is. This report shows you that Umar not only was intending to attack Fatima's house, but he tried to use religion to justify it. This is not something unusual. We see this in today's day and age, that people will often use religion in order to justify even the most haram of actions. Then I'll give you an example. We'll go a little off task, just to give you another example, so that you can perhaps recognize this in today's day and age. Al-Hajjaj, when he was besieging Mecca, he put his catapults on Jabal Abi Qubais, and he ordered his men to fire fireballs down on the people of Mecca. So obviously the Kaaba was damaged and the people of Mecca suffered immeasurably. And so one day, a lightning struck and it killed some of the men managing the catapult. And so Al-Hajjaj's army, they panicked. Their morale was low. They said, Allah is punishing us for attacking his sacred house. And so Al-Hajjaj came to them. He said, no, you've misunderstood. I come from Hijaz. This is a good sign. This is a sign that Allah is rather pleased with us. So they said to him, why? Why do you say that? He says, I used to be a Quran teacher. This is true. Al-Hajjaj used to be a teacher of the Quran. So he said to them, he said, how does Allah indicate that he accepts a sacrifice, or that he accepts a qurban, or an offering? We told them, it's through fire. So the same thing happened with Habil and Qabil, and he cited other examples. And so the army of Bani Umayyah, began shelling the Kaaba once again with increased vigor. Al-Hajjaj had convinced them that not only were they doing the right thing, but what they were doing was something that Allah was pleased with, and that they were doing it fi sabilillah. So we see this with Umar, we see this with Hajjaj, and no doubt we see this today, and it will continue happening in the future. That people will always try to use religion to justify such acts. So Umar's threat to burn the house unless the opposition came out and submitted to the new ruler is corroborated by al-Tabari, who's a historian that needs no introduction, in the English translation of his book in volume 9, page 186 to 187, as well as Ibn Abd Rabba al-Andalusi in his famous history book, Al-Aqd al-Farid, volume 5, page 13. And I really like the reference in Al-Aqd al-Farid, because Al-Aqd al-Farid gives us the names of the people who are meeting in the house. So he mentions Ali wal-Abbas wa Sa'd bin Ubadah, who's Zubayr. And then, of course, there are other reports that will mention the likes of Salman, the likes of Miqdad, the likes of Abu Dhar, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we know the people that were living in the home, young Hassan and Hussein and Zainab, alayhim salam. Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Ju'fi narrates from Imam al-Bakr and Imam al-Sadiq. He says, during the time of their doing, they're attacking the house of Fatima, and what they did, Fatima alayhi salam is said to have grabbed Umar by his collar and pulled down, saying, "By Allah, O son of al-Khattab, had I not disliked to inflict calamity upon the innocent people, you would have learned how quickly my swearing upon Allah would have brought the swift response, i.e. the wrath of Allah, upon you." And this is reported in Kitab al-Kafi al-Sharif, in volume 1, in chapter 114, which is the chapter on Syeda al-Zahara in hadith number 5. So this is another report that corroborates that there was an incident at the house, that there was an attack on the house. Shaykh al-Mufid, rahimahullah, in his book, the Amali, the Majalis collected that he used to give, he reported with his chain of transmission on the authority of Marwan ibn Uthman that when the people swore allegiance to Abu Bakr, Ali, al-Zubayr, and al-Miqdad entered the house of Fatima and refused to come out. So Umar said to them, "Set the house on fire." Then al-Zubayr came out with his sword. So Abu Bakr said, "Catch this dog." There are other reports that say it was Umar who was there who gave this order to apprehend al-Zubayr. So they advanced towards him, and he, al-Zubayr, slipped and fell, and the sword fell out of his hand. Then Abu Bakr said, "Hit him with the stone," and so they hit the sword of al-Zubayr with the stone until it broke. Ali alayhi salam left the house from the direction of Al-Aliyah and met Thabit ibn Qais ibn Shammas, who asked him, "O Abu al-Hasan, what has happened to you?" He said, "They have resolved on burning down my house while Abu Bakr is sitting on the pulpit, receiving allegiance. He neither prevents them from doing it, nor is he condemning it." So Thabit said to him, "My palm will not leave your hand till I am killed by your side." So they moved forward until they came back towards Medina, while Fatima stood at her door, and all of the people had left her house. She was saying, "I have not known an assembly of people worse than you. You left Rasulullah unattended when his corpse lay before you. You resolved about your affairs amongst yourselves, refusing to seek our leadership, and you did to us what you did, and you recognized no right for us." Again, this is transmitted by Shaykh al-Mufid, in his Kitab al-Amali. So these pieces of evidence are very, very important. They all indicate that the house, we have proof for the threat, we have proof for some of the proof for the attack. But one of the most interesting and most well-known, more infamous pieces of evidence for this attack happening is the famous deathbed confession of Abu Bakr. This report is narrated on the authority of Abdurrahman ibn Auf through multiple chains of transmission. They say that when Abu Bakr was dying, he confessed that he regretted raiding the house of Fatima, even though he knew it was being used as a gathering place of hostile intent. This report, I'm going to show you the various different sources for it. First, I'll show you the history books, the historians that mention this report. The first of them is al-Tabari in his famous Tarikh. So first we have al-Tabari. Now we have some Shia historians. We have the likes of al-Yaqubi in volume 2, page 2425. Again, this is a Shia source. In Muruj al-Dhahab by al-Mas'udi, who is a historian of great renown, in volume 2, page 237 to 238. And Ibn Abd Rabba al-Andalusi in Al-Aqd al-Farid in volume 5, page 21. So all of these historians recorded this confession. Correct, that on his deathbed, one of the things that Abu Bakr said that he regretted doing is raiding Fatima's house. And the reason why we are showing you this is because the other hadith show that they attacked the house, that perhaps they threatened the house. This report shows that the house was indeed raided, that violence did ensue. Now for hadith sources, we have Kitab al-Khisal by Shaykhuna as-Saduq, rahmatullahi alayh. in book 4, chapter 180, hadith number 1. And it is also in al-Ahadith al-Mukhtara by Ziya ad-Din al-Maqdisi. And we will return to al-Ahadith al-Mukhtara. We will analyze what he says here. It's very important. We also have al-Mu'jam al-Kabir by al-Tabarani, which is a primary source of hadith, a very old book. In volume 1, page 62 to 63, hadith number 43. The same report is in Kitab al-Amwal, volume 1, page 376. Al-Haythami, who as we know is a scholar who grades the ahadith of al-Tabarani, he weakened the hadith in Majma' al-Zawaid in volume 5, page 262 to 263, hadith number 9030. The hadith was weakened due to the presence of a narrator by the name of Ulwan ibn Dawood. This is very important because a lot of the mukhalifin, they want to weaken this report. They say, Ulwan ibn Dawood is weak. But there are two things to keep in mind. Number one, as we know, Sahha is not required for historical reports, especially if these reports are widespread. Number two, Ulwan ibn Dawood was weakened for narrating this report. That's the reason the hadith is weak. So why is the hadith weak? Because Fulan narrated it. Why is Fulan weak? Because he narrated this report. It's circular reasoning. Now, there are chains of transmission for this report that are free from Ulwan ibn Dawood, such as al-Baladhuri's and Sab al-Ashraf, volume 10, page 346 to 347, correct? Now, we also have Ibn Asakir in Tarikh Dimashq in volume 30, page 317 to 318. He narrates this with chains of transmission to the famous Egyptian scholar Layth ibn Sa'd, who's a famous faqih, a famous historian. He narrates a lot of these sorts of reports. Ibn Abi al-Hadid in Sharh Nahj al-Balagha transmits it from the book of al-Jawhari, which is now lost, in Sharh Nahj al-Balagha, volume 6. And again, his chain of transmission is different. He narrates it with a chain that does not have Ulwan ibn Dawood. And lastly, al-Dhahabi in Tarikh al-Islam, volume 3, page 118, where he transmits it with the chain of Ulwan ibn Dawood, but then he mentions another chain. He mentions another chain of transmission from al-Layth ibn Sa'd, from Salih ibn Kaysan. So we see that the reason for the weakening of this report is quite absurd. Is that they tried to weaken it due to Ulwan ibn Dawood. The ahadith has a level of tawatur. This athar has a level of tawatur. And again, I want to correct myself. It's not a hadith. It's not a hadith that goes back to the Prophet. And this is something that Sunni scholars have noted. Many Sunni scholars actually went ahead and said that this hadith is hasan. So for example, Jalaluddin al-Suyuti in his book Musnad Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, which is a book for some reason that when you look for the PDF of this book, you only find it on among the Shia for some strange reason. That this book of Suyuti, only the Shia were interested in it, and I wonder why. So it's a Sunni book, it's written by a Sunni author, but for some reason only the Shia prints it. Similar to al-Dhahabi's book on, I believe he had a book on Hadith al-Ghadir. So in Musnad Fatima al-Zahra, he transmits the same report, and at the end he says, إِنَّهُ حَدِيثٌ حَسَنٌ إِلَّا أَنَّهُ لَيْسَ فِيهِ شَيْءٌ عَنِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وآله. He says this is a Hasan report, but it's not a hadith. It doesn't go back to the Prophet. It's regarding the deathbed confession of Abu Bakr. Al-Muttaq al-Hindi also graded the report as acceptable, Hasan, in his Kanz al-Ummal, in volume 5, page 631 to 633, hadith 14,113. Lastly, I said we would go back to al-Ahadith al-Mukhtara by Ziya ad-Din al-Maqdisi. Al-Ahadith al-Mukhtara by al-Maqdisi, volume 1, page 88 to page 91, and it's hadith number 12 in this chapter. He also comments at the end, قُلْتْ وَهَذَا حَدِيثٌ حَسَنٌ عَنْ أَبِي بَكْرٍ. Says this hadith is Hasan from Abu Bakr. Correct? So in conclusion, regarding this report, we say that due to the fact that multiple well-known, renowned historians such as al-Tabari, al-Yaqubi, al-Mas'udi, al-Baladhuri, Ibn Abd Rabb al-Andalusi, the fact that all of these historians reported this confession of Abu Bakr, as well as the multiple chains of transmission that it has. Correct? And you see that there's a Sunni Shia overlap. You have al-Yaqubi, al-Mas'udi, Shaykh al-Saduq, you have the Sunnis reporting it, the likes of al-Suyuti, the likes of al-Muttaq al-Hindi, al-Dhahabi also transmitting it in his history book. And of course, the lost book of al-Jawhari. I say that this historical report has far too much tawatur. Anyone who is being just and looking at this report will admit that it is in fact factual. The only people that would reject it is someone who simply does not want this to be true. Does not want Abu Bakr to have said this, to have admitted to doing such an act or commanding such an act and not preventing it, and then on his deathbed he regrets it. One last thing to note. Something that I always bring up, something that I always want people to keep in mind, when you're debating the authenticity of the report, one of the easiest ways to tell if a report is good is to see if it has been censored. If a report has been censored, then that aids in the fact that it is authentic, for a very simple reason. If the report is da'if, then why do you have something to hide? Why are you hiding something? We've mentioned Kitab al-Amwal before. In his book, in his Kitab al-Amwal, he actually censored the report. So you'd say, why censor the report if it's da'if? If there's nothing to, if it's just a weak report. Moving on, so we have strong evidence for the threat, we have strong evidence for the attack. So we have other pieces of evidence from early history books, from other sources that we would like to present, to show you as well. It has been narrated by Nasir Ibn Muzaim al-Minqari, rahmatullahi alayhi, who is one of the early historians of the Shia. This is a very, very early historian. He narrates in Kitab Waq'at Siffin, which is his book on the Battle of Siffin, that Amr ibn al-As, when he was strategizing with Muawiyah regarding keeping Ali and Ahl al-Iraq from the water supply of the Euphrates River, he is said to have warned Muawiyah that you and me both heard Ali say many, many times in Medina that if I had 40 men, no one would have entered my home. And Nasr ibn Muzaim, rahimahullah, he comments, so he's doing idraj here, explaining the report. He says, يعني لو أن معي 40 رجلا يوم فتش البيت يعني بيت فاطمة. He says, Imam Ali used to say, if I had 40 men with me, they never would have entered my home. And so he's using this as an example to warn Muawiyah. Says Ali was willing to take on that mob with only 40 men. Imagine what he'll do to you when he has the people of Iraq backing him in order to fight you for this river. So this is a very, very early source. It's a very, very well-renowned history book, to the point where even Ibn Kathir in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya could not help but rely on Nasr ibn Muzahim's reports regarding the Battle of Siffin. From Ali as well, we have the report that Ali once said, name your children before they are born. And if you do not know whether they are male or female, then name them with such names that are good for both male and female. In case a child is miscarried, then when that child will meet you on Yawm al-Qiyamah, whom you had not given a name, it will say to his father, I wish you had named me. The Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had named al-Muhsin alayhi salam before his birth. So this report is in Al-Kaf al-Sharif, in volume 6, book 1, chapter 10, hadith number 2. I want to comment on this hadith briefly. We know that one of the rights of the son, the rights of the child upon the father is that, the right that you give them a name. And so Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullahi alayhi is giving you a very practical reason for this. He's saying that if you do not name your child, even if they are miscarried, even if they do not, are not born, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, that miscarried child will tell you as the father, says, why didn't you give me a name? That was my haqq. That was my right upon you. Correct? And so he's referring to al-Muhsin as an example of a miscarried child. Furthermore, and this is one of the more rare examples, I rarely see this one being cited as proof for this incident. It was very difficult for me to track down. It is reported that when Urwa ibn Zubayr, the son of the famous Sahabi, the famous narrator, he's the nephew of Aisha bint Abi Bakr, when he was questioned regarding his brother Abdullah ibn Zubayr's intending to burn Bani Hashim for refusing to pledge allegiance to him during his counter-caliphate in Mecca, Urwa cited the precedent of Abu Bakr. Had he not used fire to threaten his enemies when they threatened to cause disunity and sedition? And this is transmitted in Al-Mas'udi's Muruj al-Dhahab in volume 3, page 69, as well as Sharh Nahj al-Balagha by Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili, volume 20, page 147. So this is a very interesting example and a very interesting piece of evidence regarding the attack on the house. Is that Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who is without a doubt one of the most despicable men of his time, Abdullah ibn Zubayr had demanded that Bani Hashim pledge allegiance to him, the likes of Abdullah ibn Abbas and Muhammad ibn Hanafiyah. And so what Ibn Zubayr did is he locked them in wooden cages and began to pile firewood around them, and he was threatening to burn them. And so Al-Mukhtar, when he heard about this, Al-Mukhtar ibn Abi Ubayd al-Thaqafi, he sent horsemen from Kufa to free them. And so they freed them and they took them to Al-Ta'if. And that is where Abdullah ibn Abbas passed away. when Urwa ibn Zubayr was confronted about this, they said, your brother was a maniac. He was a pyromaniac. Why did he try to burn Bani Hashim? He tried to burn the Prophet's relatives, tried to burn the men of the Prophet's tribe. Urwa ibn Zubayr, the way he defended himself was by citing the precedent of their Siddiq, of their Faruq. Says, Abu Bakr and Umar had done the same thing. They did it because they wanted to prevent fitna. This is a good thing that they did. It's a good thing that my brother did. He was threatening them with fire because he was trying to stop sedition. He was trying to stop disunity among the people. And we say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. We would say, I would reply to Urwa ibn Zubayr and to anyone who uses this horrible argument. I say, by your logic, then the army of Yazid was also using fire against the tents of al-Hussein ibn Ali. They were also burning the homes of al-Hussein ibn Ali because he refused to give allegiance to Yazid. And they also rained fire down on the people of Mecca for refusing to give bay'ah to Yazid. Are you saying that the precedent of Abu Bakr and Umar justifies this as well? And that's the dangerous thing about the precedent of Abu Bakr and Umar, is that when you look at Bani Umayyah, a lot of the Mukhalifin, they try to say, the first Khulafa, the Shaykhin, they were Rashidun caliphs. Bani Umayyah were later, they turned it into mulk. Say, sure, they turned it into mulk, but the one thing that remained constant between them is that there was dhulm. Correct? That there was always dhulm. Except for, we'd say, a few years in between. For four years and some odd months, when Amir al-Mu'mineen Salamullah alayh and Aba Muhammad al-Hasan al-Mujtaba, when they attempted their best to restore order. Correct? But with that being said, we're going to bring this lecture to a close. We'll end with Surah Al-Fatiha, تسبقها الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.